So, as a continuing chapter of the observance of the biblical calendar, an analysis of what we have to observe and know what religiously is supposed to be, we're going to have a little chapters today of what is going to be tradition and it's going to be religious observance from Judaism specifically, because that's the only way that you can get any other festivals observance is if it's just from Judaism, but still following into some traditionals that are not according to Torah, as Yeshua pointed that we should be observing, and not the Takanot or Geserot that are given from the rabbinic Talmudic scholars. So that's going to be a little bit of a short intro of what we're going to be observing today. First of all, of course, we're going to see of the biblical calendar, the time of service, what I said, that's what's going to be biblical and what is going to be tradition from a man, worldly speaking, what is going to be what I said, specifically what is going to be the halacha and versus to Torah in no short words. More or less, we're going to see after that a little bit of what's going to be biblical times, where it's going to be sowing or seeding and harvesting. And side of the Israel culture, customs, and manners, what it would be those little scriptural teachings that Eternal gives to us through the history of Israel, and according to the culture time, what would be the teaching for us, because they all have some spiritual teachings for us, so we can follow those paths the Messiah follow, also like the same prophetic time that he spoke through the parables. So first of all, we're going to see today, I'm going to try to go a little bit, not speeding, but I'm going to try to be a little bit short in what we're going to see today. So Torah teaches us that the three pilgrimage festivals, 7 prophetic times, of course, the Passover, the first fruits, unleavened bread, Pentecost, the trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and booths or tabernacles, all written down in Leviticus 23 Torah. We kind of started seeing a little bit of the last chapter, and those are the appointed times that the time of servants that the Eternal wants us to leave, to leave the paganism of the world, to come to observe is these special times that teach us prophetic times for gathering to him, and to, of course, following the path of Yeshua, which is the light and the true life for the world. I'm going to make a little bit of the difference between the Torah and what is going to be the oral law, the written law and the written law and the oral law. So in the written law, the Hebrew scriptures, we have all the shadows that we can see from the prophets and the Psalms and the Torah, which is going to be the Tanakh. In the Tanakh, we have every single thing that it was written down to follow to find Yeshua. As Yeshua said, you're searching the scriptures, you seem to have the eternal life, and they are talking about me, right? So that's why we go back to Torah. That's why we go about the Psalms, the prophets, to find Messiah, to find all those single things that they scrutinize for us, and there are all those shadows for us, of course. But when we go to Talmud, what is the oral tradition that's based on Mishnah, which is based on Gemara, which is based in all this rabbinic literature, it has a big difference between it. Just for giving a little example, if you want to determine the descendants, biblically speaking, I mean from the 67 books of the Bible, and especially in the Tanakh, you're going to see the descendants of men, descendants for the people of Israel, come from men. And there's no exception of people. You can set every single one as far as they come to obedience, as far as they come, of course, in the time they have to do the Brit Milah, circumcision. But of course, in Yeshua, there is no circumcision as far as you change your heart, totally in obedience, totally in sanctification, on holiness, on Shomer Torah. So, talking about the descendants of men, there is no exception of people. We see that into Jacob, which is in Jacob's sons, Israel, the sons of Israel, they all came to Mizraim, to Egypt, and they made all Canaanites. For example, Joseph, he married an Egyptian, and from Joseph we see Ephraim and Manasseh, one of the primordial tribes in the people of Israel. Then we see Moses marrying a Midianite, right? Or Boaz was the first descendants from the kingdom, royal blood from David, and this married with a Midianite, right? Ruth. Sorry, Moses to a Midianite, and Boaz married Ruth with a Moabite. She was a Moabite, but she changed her faith and she changed every single thing to come to Israel, to become Israel, obedience to Torah. Shubulai him, come back to me, I will come back to you, right? And the last one we can make as example, maybe Solomon, which he married an Ammonite. So we see that biblically all the lineage come from men, speaking onto the Tanakh. But if you go to the rabbinical Talmud, rabbinical literature, whatever you want to call it, his descendants, their descendants come from a woman. And if they want to become a Jewish, if it is in quotes, get said, no foreign woman can, except if it is called through the halacha, every single thing writing down in there, which is basically the first thing writing down, which of course was the Mishnah, which is the repetition of the written law or the Torah in this say of the late Hebrew, and then from the Mishnah they got the Gemara in Aramaic. What we have today is not truly Hebrew, but a slight disruptions of Hebrew with a little bit of Aramaic Hebrew. So okay, but it's still following a lot of the sentence of what a biblical Hebrew needs to be understood, because they have a totally difference. One thinks Aramaic and another thinks is Hebrew, right? So that's the point what the Talmud, what the rabbinical scholars in their literature teach, which is not that. We see brought down there that later the Mishnah with Rambam Maimons in the 11,000, when they got a lot of that in the Spain, and they divided on the deception of the church close by. They have they start classifying all the materials into the Talmud in different 5 orders. And then in the other side you have the Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or HaKodesh, who died in 190, classified the material into 6 seradim of orders. That's talking about the Talmud. So very different things that they start talking about every single thing what is Torah says, every single thing that they assume they have, because they related after Yeshua said. They start writing these things around 200 or maybe 400 after Yeshua, right? So that's a little bit of what we have to say. But those things, they have a little bit of the time that we need to observe. They start down all that oral Torah in what's called the Alacha, which is Yeshua burdened with heavy burdens. The heavy burdens, which is a different kind of law. The oral law is not the written law. The written law is the Torah. Those are the mitzvot, the takan, the edot, hukim, and mishpatim. All those are laws, decrees, testimonials that you can see in the paragraph in there, where we can observe so we can follow Torah. Only my Torah. Like is being told to Yehoshua said, be careful to do every single thing is written down in this book, not in the book of the rabbis, please. Not call everybody rabbi. The only rabbi is Yeshua. So you back to Yeshua, it goes back a little bit of 200 years, and you can see the Sugot back in there. By the time of the Yeshua, they around 70 years, 70 after the destruction of the temple, the Tanaim, Amoraim, Savoraim, Genoim, Rishonim, and Acharonim, till today. All those contain a little bit of the rabbinical teaching or the Jewish concept of what is scriptural supposed to be on the Tanakh. After the Council of Javne, or around the year 200, closing the Tanaim era, all that assimilation came to the first exile from the Ezra, and when they came to when they were brought down to exile 800 years ago, before the Tanaim. I'm talking about when they were took down to Babylon, and so they start taking all that assimilation, coming back, writing down, putting it down into all that literal concept of Judaism in captivity. So Judaism was born around 200 BC, before Mashiach. And there's all those Sugots, and they're one of those examples of Sugots. The first ones that we can remind is Shammai and Gamaliel. After Shammai and Gamaliel, there's going to be Rabbi Beshua and Rabbi Eliezer. After those two, you can be Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Rabba and Abai. So there was always a written down concession between 2, 3, 4, 5 sides, and it was no monolithic opinion. Acceptance of religion was pretty much down. I can accept your understanding, and we got no concession into one point. Different to what Yeshua said. Yeshua established a really one path straight to Torah, right? And every single son coming down from the Hebrew descendants, I'm talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all the Hebrew people after Jacob come called Ben Israel. There's no Hebrews today. All that come Ben Israel, that covenant that was done with Israel. So that wisdom, that understanding of Torah versus the human understanding, they base that the knowledge, it was established because we talked about a couple of chapters, because that's going to be what they said, because established some judges and they established themselves on their own wisdom. But Torah is not like that. Torah hasn't changed in the last 6,000 years. Torah hasn't changed, and after 2,000 years that we haven't changed, it's still the same, and we're still learning from it. We're still having all these shadows we're gonna about to see, and especially about the festivals. So, but they want every single one who come to the obedience to the knowledge of the biblical faith being followed by takanot, the case of the law. And of course, you have to follow the Geserot, restrictions from the law. And follow all those single heavy burdens, mishharim, the customs. All those little things came to, example, Rosh Hashanah, they celebrated in Yom Teruah. It's not the first months for the people of Israel. Simchat Torah is not writing down in Torah. They started celebrating Hanukkah. Where is that in Leviticus 23? Purim, that's never in there. Those old Talmudics, pretty much Talmudic were all that literature brings some fabulous even from Babylon. The Seder of Pesach, they start bringing all these traditional things in there. It's not written down as the Edot is written down in Leviticus 23. Sefriat HaOmer. We have to understand, we start counting the Omer. It's not counting by days. It said 7 weeks, right? Matan Torah by Shavuot, because they want to deny the comings of the divine presence against the people, as he promised to all people in the prophets. And Yeshua said that to the apostles, right? So on. They have a lot of different traditional things coming there. By the other hand, I want to also mention, if you can see the right side, the Enoch calendar. And this is a recent thing. This is not coming through the ages. This is a recent thing. The Enoch calendar was something that it was just recently, before the Enoch calendar, or way after the Enoch calendar, we have Moses. Every single thing bring down to Moses. Yeshua pointed to Moses, right? It's not such a thing as whatever. Even after Enoch, it was Noah. After Noah, we have Moses. Every single thing was given to Moses, and we follow the same thing. It's not different than what I have today. All right, that's pretty short to come to see. So the harvest time that we have to see, and I forgot to mention a little bit of what in the rabbinic literature there was so much in Mishnah, Gemara, Midrash, Kadesh, Targumim, Sidur, Selichot, Agadah. Back in there, it was no synagogue. It was called Nikrei or Bar Mitzvah, Shacharit, Tefilim, Talit. All that included into the rabbinic literature, just because they don't have a temple to follow all their ordinances they had before. Of course, we have a little different kind of service in the Ruach, the Holy Spirit inside of us. Every single thing that we have into Scripture is following this harvest. to plow the land. Spring late, the late spring rain, the early rain on summer. We have the beginning of the dry season, cutting the barley and the flax, the wheat harvest, fixed reaping, and then picking olives from the dates, and the summer figs coming before the winter figs. Plow the land again, to sowing, to seeding, and every single in between that time we have the festival, uh, agricultural festival, and in the early kind of living that we have through the Israel life. All those shadows, all those teachings that the scripture teaches us is living out that spiritual conscience that we have to follow as the Messiah given his parables. It's not coincidence. Every single thing that the Father has done, and has done it perfectly for us, to follow that path and not to go away and just especially. But the thing is that we live in a very different system today. We live in a system where we have to follow by buildings, by farmings, by farming by great machinery and industrial way that has ruined every single thing. That anything is not, any single domestic crop that might be built in there is being always changed the land by feeding the land with chemicals and stuff that is not according to scripture. So things has changed considerably till back then, but the scripture still remain with the same intention as 4,000 years ago given to Moses. For every single one is given into the prophets, and for us, which is the same fate as they follow. The same fate as they follow. It's not different. It's not different at all. So, of course, between the harvest season, between the pilgrimage festivals, so the 7 prophetic times, along the year, we celebrate all the festivals. And if you keep looking into the festivals, every single one has been related to agricultural time, into the people of Israel, to where living. The Passover, first fruits, unleavened bread, all connected to the cropping and picking up the beginning of the rice season, cutting the barley and the flax. Pentecost is when the picking up all the wheat, the wheat harvest. As the last season, it was bring down from Yeshua, right? And so on and so on. So I'm gonna start a little bit, bringing a little bit of what agriculture could mean for us in today. So biblical agriculture. As you remember, back in Egypt, people in Egypt and all the systems, even in Babylon, they have to irrigate their lands. But when the Joseph is about to enter with Israel to the promised land, and it's written down in Deuteronomy 11:10-15, since the land that you are about to enter and inherit it isn't like the land of Egypt that you just left, where you planted seed and irrigated with your feet like a vegetable garden. I mean, so easy. That's what's meant. Instead, the land that you're crossing over to inherit is a land on hills and valleys that drinks water supplied by the rain from heaven. Supplied by the rain of heaven. And the land about which the Eternal, your Elohim, is about to concern it, because the eyes of the Eternal are continuously on it through the entire year. Take a look that he's mentioned through the entire year, right? So that's very important to remember, that the land of Israel is always being looked through the eyes of the Eternal, and is being fixed in a way that Israel has no rivers. There's always been constantly rain by the Eternals. So the winter rains, and of course in Israel land, the winter is not like in our lands, which is more extend with the snow and a little bit of rain. There's more rain out there, so the rains and a little bit of snow, yes, depending on the areas, will determine the seasonal times, which are also a sign of the time to understand the seasonal times that he has brought to our the big two lights in the heavens, which is the sun and the moon, of course, right? So that's a little bit to understand in that part. So there were no such a regularity or certainty in Canaan. There was always The success of the agriculture depended not on the rise of the great rivers, but on the winter rains, which I said, which vary from year to year, and on conservation of the water. So that's what Moses just warned these people in Deuteronomy. And it was so uncertain was the rainfall in the Canaanite religion was based on form of sympathetic, magic, and so there comes Baal. You remember Baal or Baal or Baal? It was the god, the storm god for the Canaanites. So there's capricious water supplies were not the only thing that made Canaanite agriculture uncertain, right? I'm just taking a little bit notes here. I got my read note. So the hot desert winds also, it's something that we can see until today that determine a really, really hard to determine the crops growing up, because the hot winds and the sun, and especially in barley, it takes a lot of consensus to to examine and to determine the fast growing the barley. So the hot desert winds it helped to determine a serious problem to the people of Israel, right? So another one was the locusts arrived. They seem to be like an army. It was right down in Proverbs 30:27. I'm not gonna put those verbs in here. Sorry. So the Eternal called them like an army of locusts, as a Proverbs 30:27. Although they stay put on cold, they as a Nahum 3:17, erosion was another problem. The winter rains tended to wash the covering of soil down from the hills, retaining walls that had to be built. Farming began to be done on the early men instead of gathering wild rains and vegetables. It was positive collecting the seeds and sow them in one place. The first sites used to grow crops were the places where the wild varieties grew, and in wells, water and drain spots to adequate warm and suitable soil. It was only the development of a farm implements the irrigation techniques and agriculture began to advance. So that's a little bit of that. I'm gonna put it there. It was a little bit the the Gesser calendar. By the time of the Jewish people disposed, the Canaanites were a considerable number of crops. So we have here this Gesser calendar. Is supposed to be a clay tablet discovered in 1908, and according to a Palestine exploration, and it gives the agricultural times where he's gonna be harvesting every single kind of crop, every single kind of for during the the times of the year, right? I gave a little bit translation in there. The planting in January and February was millet, peas, lentils, beans, and cucumbers. Olive harvest September, October. Planting grain in November and December. Planting the grain November and December. And the soil was soft after the late rains, so it could be that. So by the time that January and February, all the water irrigation of the rains had been come away, all that all the harvest going up of flax in March could be harvested. The month of barley harvest in April, the month of harvest and festivity in May. That's talking about the spring festivities. And 2 months are vine tending in June and July. The month of summer fruit, August for the Sukkot time, of course. So that's a very, very interesting to see that Gesser calendar right there, which says that the ownership of a sheep and perhaps some cattle, each on land, each of his own and land. The farmer system could be called self-sufficient mixed farming. This land accumulated the novels and the expense of original farmers. A system of royal tenants developed, and stewards were appointed to be in charge of the vintners. We see that in Samuel, 1 Samuel 8:14. We see there were protests against his development from the prophets, Isaiah 5:8, and Nehemiah forced to return the property to the original owners in Nehemiah 5, a situation that remained until the conquest of the country by armies and Greece and Rome, when it's possible to get the mass land again. It's written down in Luke 12:18-19. Using ancient schoolboy calendar exercise, we'll now look some of the things that we're growing. So growing the crops, grain the crops in there. There are two most important grains, the wheat and the barley and millet. It was grown as well. In Ezekiel 4:9, we can see that the barley could be grown in a poorer soil, and in a shorter growing season, it was less valued in a crop than wheat. All right. So this is plowing. Plowing there. The plowing is plowing and sowing were often in one operation, that the grain was scattered from open basket and replenished from a sack tied on the back of the donkey, and it took about 3 pounds of seed to the half acre. Some of the investigations I've done through the Babylonians has invented a primitive seed drill that was in the use of some places. It was more economical with the seed, so they were the first one to invent that. But in the time of Israel, the seed was a little bit more like it was more plowed. It was more plowed in taken to the birds. I said Yeshua mentioned it. This method of sowing and underlies the parable of the sower in Matthew 13, where it was hard to add of thorns awaiting the plot. The plot itself was made of 2 wooden beams and a T fashion. The horizontal stroke forming a handle of guidance, and the spike it was to track the surface on the ground. Right, you can see that in the figure. And what else I can say there? As example of the yoke itself was simply talking about the yoke round beam tied across the necks of the pair of animals, 2 bulls, 2 donkeys. It has to be 2 equal animals. I'll place it into vertical sticks and came down each side in the neck of the tie beneath the animal. So in Jeremiah 28:13, we see that example, 28, that after the prophet Hananiah had brought the yoke of the neck of the prophet Jeremiah, or Yirmiah, the word of the Eternal came to Yirmiah, go and tell Hananiah, this is what the Eternal says. You have broken the wooden yoke. By the place you will get a yoke of iron. But in its place you will get a yoke of iron. Sorry. This is what the Eternal Almighty says. The Elohim of Israel, the Almighty of Israel says, I will put an iron yoke on the necks of all these nations to make them serve Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And they will serve him. I will even give him control over the wild animals. Talking about and shadows of the whole peoples, even if the animals too. Every single came to the commandment of Nebuchadnezzar. So the animals were using an oxen if possible, and if a bull was used, it was castrated. Sometimes the law forbade the mixture of animals, such an ox of a donkey. It was written down in Deuteronomy 22:10. And we understand that presumably because they were in an equal pool, of course. So the regulation prohibited the partnership between believers and unbelievers, writing down in Corinthians 6:14, do not be yoked together. I'm sorry. With unbelievers. It was not simple, not being equal. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. That was not simply an exclusivity. It was made out of the knowledge of suffering, what it could be caused, right? So that's a little bit of the plot. So the early plots were light, although they were portable. They could be carried for some distance to the shoulder. They could scratch the surface to the ground in the depth only the 3 to 4 inches, 7 to 100 millimeters. The reason of floor ground must be looked back in the Luke 9:62 was not because he needed to his concentration so that the might push down hard and dig deep enough into the ground. He had to watch the stones and boulders too, since they could wreck so light the tool, although the lightness did not mean that he could lift the plot over the obstacle. In my own thought, it was actually to plow the land, you need to follow some certain lines to sow your fields properly too. So it's not just that you're gonna look back and that's it. No, you have to keep looking straight and where your bulls are following the line properly. 2 witnesses for that, Torah and Yeshua. So plowing was sometimes done in a team. Each farmer contributed his own plot and oxen until the fields, the whole village were covered. Elisheva was plowing with even with 11 other people and 24 oxen when he was called to his prophetic ministry in 1 Kings 19 and 19. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. A donkey and an oxen. Okay, so in agriculture, we have there the harvesting time, right? The flax was harvested in March and April by cutting the stems with a hoe and a ground level. As soon as that was complete, the barley was ready to harvesting. The standing grain was cut in a sickle and a handheld crescent-shaped tool uh, with a sharp cutting edge. In early times, the implement would be made of wood or even a large jawbone of an animal, mostly of a donkey. And flames would be set among the inner edge ladder in time of metal sticks were available. In Jeremiah 50:16, Joel 3:13 examples are that. So, an example of that, behold, we were blind sheaves in the field, and oh, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. That's talking about Joseph and Genesis, of how they were collecting the sheaves on harvesting, right? And give us a little teaching on how he becoming something to his brothers and to his family, right? so so like we see there, the stalks were cut near to the top, and the remainder left into the ground to the for the grazing of the sheep. And they were tied into bundles and then loaded into donkeys or to the bulls, sometimes put it into a cart and be taken away to threshing or threshing later on. Then the ground was normally cut by a group of people working together. By the corners of the fields had to be left for the poor, according to Leviticus 23:22, right? The poor were also allowed to walk behind the reapers to pick up or to glean anything that the reapers had missed, according to Deuteronomy 20:24, 19, 20, 22. So the story of Ruth is set against such as a background about this, that she was able to feel the large skirt of her robe with what she had collected about that. The grain was tender, dry, in time of reaping, of course, and there was a danger of fire sometimes from people that wanted to abuse of the fields because of that. Then it come that way. So threshing. Let's see if I have threshing following here. Or no, it's a little bit more. Oh yeah, this is threshing. So in threshing we have the separation from the grain from the straw was done by threshing the floor. It could be any hard, compacted surface. It may have been made by smoothed rock. Presumably, it was the threshing floor of a Jebusite. First down, it was down in First Chronicles 21st, 1826, and in a compacted earth. The earth and threshing floor were often covered with a grass. The fresh grass coming from spring, and became an ideal place to pitch the tent. So they were known as summer threshing floors, right? Especially coming in of Ruth. Threshing was sometimes done by beating the grain with a flail, a long flexible stick. You can see there in the top left picture, and and if small quantities were involved, Ruth used a method of the Gideon, the same one as using a stone bottom of a wine press. It's written down in Judges 6:11, example of the psalmist imagines doing this enemy. No, that's not wrong. So oxen were the often means of threshing grain. A pair was yoked together, same thing as plowing, but this time have the little as example in there with the two kids on the horse. So the two oxen were put in there to threshing the floor, and they were driven round and around, but a couple of people in the back or some heavy load into the back of the table. So the Torah said that the oxen should not be muzzled when doing this kind of work, so that they could eat. And this is written down in Deuteronomy 25:4. What do that means into their Brit Hadasha that sorry, I have a little bit cold. Into the Brit Hadasha is used to lay down the principle that the servers, given of the good news, the gospel, in quotes, should always be able to live from their ministry. 1 Corinthians 9:7-9. 1 Corinthians verse 9, 7-10, actually put it down. So, did you ever heard of a soldier paying his own expenses? Or a farmer planting a vineyard without eating his grapes? Who shepherds a flock without drinking some of its milk? What I'm saying is not based on merely human authority, because the Torah says the same thing. So he's not talking about something came from him, it's something came from Torah. And he just quotes, for in the Torah of Moshe it's written. For in the Torah of Moshe is written, and we come back to Torah again. You are not to put a muzzle in an ox when it's treading off the grain. If Elohim is concerned about cattle, all the more does he say for our sakes. Yes, it was written for us, meaning for the servers that are trying to get the fruit from his harvest, right? Meaning that he who plows and he who threshes should work expecting to get the share of the crop. How about that? How about that? It's a teaching that we get from the cropping and threshing on the floor. So that's a little bit of the threshing, more or less. Those the exemplary tools that we have in the image. Winnowing. So in the evening, when the breeze developed, the separated grain and the straw was gathered into a pile on the center of the threshing floor for winnowing. For this, farmer used a 5-pronged fork called the winnowing fan, and a spade that was called winnowing shovel. The fork was first used by putting into a pile and throwing the mixture of grain and straw into the air. The heavier grain fell back while the straw was blown away in the wind. When the remained was too small to be picked up by the fork, the shovel was used for the same purpose if there was no wind possible. If there was no wind, it was possible. Well, winnowing was small quantities that create a wind by planting a piece that manting, right? And we're gonna see some a little bit further about that. And the chaff was gathered up and used to the same domestic stove. The straw was collected from the animals. So you see that wooden fork, and this kind of was used in the biblical times to winnowing the grain and to go for war I can imagine an army full of farmers with those things. Jeez, it will look so terrible. I mean, they will look very vicious. So the grain had to be purified by sifting. The wheat and barley grains were mixed, all kinds of loose fragments from the threshing floor. Everything was put into a large sieve that allowed the grain to pass through, but left the most of the rubbish behind. It was also necessary to remove any kind of darnel grains. At this stage, darnel was called tares or weeds in the Brit Hadasha, the New Testament. It looks identical to wheat until the grain ripens, of course, when it becomes black instead of yellow, and see Matthew 13:24-30. So the grains are bitter and cause dizziness and sickness of eating. So this picture of the separation of good and bad was used in a picture that to judge people in Psalm 1:4 and Jeremiah 15:7. The whole process used to be by John the Baptist to illustrate the work from Yeshua and Matthew 3:12 when Yeshua said that Satan wanted to see the Peter like wheat in Luke 22:31, and he was probably referring to the physical shaking of the sieve. When this part of the work was done, then a farmer normally stayed with the grain in the night, camping out to threshing the floor to ensure that the harvest was not stolen. And that's written in Ruth 3. On Jeremiah 15:6-7, mentioned, we see that you have rejected me, says Adonai. You are heading backward, not forward. You're getting backward because you have rejected me. And what is rejecting Adonai? Rejecting Adonai rejects his misbod, all those edod, all those misbod that he's writing down on Torah. You're heading backward. You're not going forward. You're going backwards, going down to the floor. So I'm stretching out my hand against you. Ooh, tired of sparing you. I'm destroying you. With a winnowing fork, I am scattering them. So the wind in the gates of the land. I am burying them, destroying my people, because they will not return from their ways. For not return from their ways. Shaul talks about all these things that we see on the prophets and in the Torah are reading for the teach of us, so we can learn from them, so we cannot follow the same kind of disobedience. So on pretty much the last one that we have is maybe storage. The following day that the grain would be measured into standard gathering earthenware receptacle that look like they're named from their capacity. As much as possible was put into receptacle until overflowed, and the grain was then stored in small quantities in the earthen jars or larger quantities in a dry pit of cistern, a room attached to the house, or even in a barn, written down in Deuteronomy 28, 8, Proverbs 8:10, Matthew 13:30, Luke 12:18. They were also public storage granaries in Genesis 41:48, and that may be from Yosef, and public grain silos. There were a number of ways to keep pests away. The storehouse were built in a brick with thick walls, and the only way to get through it was a hole in the top of the building, and sides of the walls were plastered. Such storehouses were used to provide a central place to receive the offerings that supported the ministry, of course. One tend to produce the land fruit of the crops had to be offered in Leviticus 27:30 to 32, Deuteronomy 14:22 to 29. They didn't use fertilizers in the land, of course, to grain the crops, although animal manure was sometimes used to other places. The land was instead given a rest every 7 Sabbath year, Shabbat, the Shemitah, Leviticus 25:1 to 7. So Elohim promised a bumper harvest in the 6th year to enable people to live through the 7th year, Leviticus 25:18-22. Whatever grew in the 7th year was the property of the poor. So this instruction, this law, was not kept in the early days in the kingdom of the chronic saw the exile, that the means that given the land is stolen Shabbat rest. Reading down in Second of Chronicles 36:21, and after the exile, Nehemiah attempt to restore the practice of resting the land. We have that in Nehemiah 10:31, and it was in operation during the Greek period that the Jews lacked provisions for the Shabbat year granted to the land. Maccabees, First Maccabees 6:49 and 53. More or less, that's a little bit of the customs of what is there. And this last one I want to mention, one that Yeshua said about crops, as Yeshua put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed a good seed in his field. A good seed in his field. I think I missed a couple pages. No, that's going to be okay. Let them both grow together until the harvest. Until the harvest. Oh, a shadow of the last harvest. I will tell the reapers to collect the weeds first and tie them into the bundles to be burned. To be burned, but to gather the wheat into my barn. Into my barn. So you're gonna see there the ones also they used to burn all those wheats and all the process, more or less. Okay, so when I see a little bit here of what's gonna be, that I think is the moon observance. Yes. So sorry for the seeding and harvesting. Lesser light. So the lesser light is one of the first uh, witnesses that we have in the heavens to appointed time. He appointed the moon, Jareh, from Hebrew 3394, for seasons, Moedim, for Moed, the Hebrew word 4150. Write down on Psalm 104:19. He appointed the moon. The moon has two words to call being a moon. That's gonna be Yareh, which is less popular than the one that we saw previously, which was uh, Chodesh, Chodesh, a renew of every month, Chodesh Tov or Rosh Chodesh. So speak to the sons of Israel and tell them these are the appointed Moedim, the appointed times of Adonai, appointed times of His, which you are to proclaim a holy convocations, Mikrei Kodesh, as we saw previous time, the Mikrei Kodesh, holy convocations that He proclaimed for His people, for holy people, my Moedim, Leviticus 23:2. So the first one we're gonna see is the light, the light. So the biblical calendar, the moons begin with the new crescent moon. The months begin with the new crescent moon. The Hebrew word for month is Chodesh, literally means new moon. Rosh Chodesh, like I said. So it contemplates the period between the one new month to the other. This understanding that the biblical month lasts a lunar cycle, 29 days and a half to 9.5. Okay, that's what it's talking about here. So he created the moon for the holidays. There's no doubt that the biblical phase depends on the moon, one of the witnesses on the creation given to us, so we can see where the appointed times are. The greatest proof of his patches is Psalm 104, which says that he created the moon for Moedim. The Hebrew term for Moedim, appointed times, is the same word used to describe the biblical feast in Leviticus 23. Okay? The same word. So it's the same ordinance. These are Moedim, appointed times. In translations, is the translation of solemn feast of the eternal, holy convocations that will be proclaimed for their times. So when the psalmist says that the Eternal created the moon for Moedim, he means that the moon was created to determine the time of the feast of the Eternal. So when we said Chodesh is related to the new moon as well. Chodesh Tov, new moon, Chodesh. The previous passage clearly teaches that the holidays, on that one is Chodesh Tov or the Yereh. Sorry. Uh, the previous passage clearly teaches that the holidays are ruled by the moon. By the moon. So, but the Torah was given on Psalms 104 had not yet been written, so it cannot be in our source. But in question arises, how is that could the ancient Israelites have known that the moon was on function? So, the Hebrew Chodesh, which you itself a biblical Hebrew, implies a new moon. For example, in the 1 Kings 6:38, in the month Yareach of Bul, which is the 8th month, Chodesh. Or in 1 Kings 8:2, in the month Yareach, again, moon, of Etanim, which is the 7th month, Chodesh. Chodesh. Again, so another proof that Chodesh is related to the moon, Yareach, is the phase of Chodesh, month of days in Genesis 29:14, Numbers 2:20, meaning that the period of 29 or 30 days, which is an equivalent of phase of Yareach, month or moon. So they're both together. They mean and to be on the same determination for the moon. In the word Yareach means moon is what the eternal meant at the biblical month is determined according to the moon. Uh, so why start using Yareach? Chodesh, we don't use Yareach. If the word Yareach means moon, what eternal meant its biblical month to be determined according to the moon, and why it should be used a month Chodesh. So Chodesh means a new moon day, a renew. Chodesh is new moon, derived from the stem Hadash, Hey Dalet Shim, which implies the idea of renew or to make new again. This is why a crescent moon is called Chodesh, from its root Hebrew Hadash, since it's the first time the new moon is seen renewed after having been hidden for a few days, sometimes 3, sometimes 2, 2.5, and it's the end of the month at the end of the lunar cycle. So at the end of the lunar month, the moon is close to the sun from perspective to the earth, and the motion between the earth, the sun, and the moon is eventually reaches a point of conjunction when it passes between the earth and the sun from perspective of the human eye, of course. In a consequence of this, during the conjunction time, a very little of illuminated part of the moon is visible to the earth, right? So it's no longer visible to the human eye. Then after the moon continues moving into the sky, and the sun passes the sun, and it is some percentage of light, it can be seen at the sunset. Shortly after the sun sets, right? This appearance of the moon can occur between 1.5 to 3.5 days after the conjunction, right? After the day 29. So that's the time that we don't know if the Eternal decides to make the light on the moon sooner or later. So he's the only one who knows what's going to be that. So that's why it says no one knows it. And that's especially called in Yom Teruah. And since it proceeds by this time of darkness, the ancient Israelite called this first visible moon Chodesh, a renew, Hadash, coming from the word Hadash. So one of the first things that we have to see in the crescent moon versus the astronomical new moon, or what sometimes they call the dark moon, is the contrary, astronomically contrary to what has been stated above. Or we just say it has chosen the term new moon to indicate the time of conjunction, that is, of darkness, wanting to postulate a way that the new moon is not when it is visible and renewed, but when it's between the sun and the earth. And that's what astronomical observance is, right? And it's visible to the human eye. So in this study, we just build the biblical definition and the modern new moon, not astronomical. There are some positions outside there to try to support this theory that the new moon started when it's a dark moon, which is an astronomical view, is not a biblical perspective. Okay, but there are some positions that try to support this theory that the new moon is when it's not in conjunction, when it's dark, and they seek to destroy biblical passages of Psalms 18:81:3, which is saying, "Sound the trumpet for the new moon, Chodesh, on full moon, Keseh, for the new day of our parties." There's nothing has to relate it with the Hadash. So according to this theory of conjunction, the term Keseh derived from the root Keshi, which means to cover. So here it could mean a moon cover or moon in conjunction. According to this interpretation, the bird reads, sounds the trumpet on the day of the conjunction moon, covered moon, instead of the full moon. However, the language does not support this argument. Remember, Hebrew, since the second half of the verse refers to the feast of the eternal. Okay, so in the Bible, Eternal commands us to celebrate 3 annual pilgrimage festivals. These are the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Feast of Pentecost, Feast of Tabernacles. In fact, all these feasts are in the middle of the month. On Unleavened Bread, on the Feast of Pentecost, it will be a full moon, full of light. Okay, same thing with the Feast of Tabernacles, 15th of the month. The month should be full, plenty of light. It means it's happy, it means it's full of light, fully illuminated, the whole congregation from the light of the Messiah. Okay, 2 of them are specific in the 15th of the month. Therefore, it does not make sense to blow a trumpet with the moon is in conjunction, since in reality, the festival moon is completely full and visible. Okay, some suggest, on the other hand, and it's about the Yom Teruah, which is on the new moon in the 7th month, but it depends in the scriptures that it is never referred as a hag, as a feast. Yom Teruah is not a feast. It's a mikra. It's a zikaron. It's a tryout. But rather than moed is appointed at times, so the term is keseh and hag cannot refer to Yom Teruah. Okay, I'm going to stop in that one for the moon. I'm going to keep a little bit going here because I have nothing, a little bit more to observe about the moon. So, Mirakatan, Miragadol, the sun, and Mirakatan, the moon. The higher light, the lesser light, moon. In terms of understanding biblical scripture, and Elohim said, "Let it be lights in the spans of the heavens to separate the day from the night." To separate the day from the night is the first thing that he specifies. So one thing separates the day from the night is the sun. Okay, moon can come in the day, moon can come in the night. So moon cannot separate the day from the night. The sun does. The light of the sun separates the moon of the night. The light of Yeshua separates from the darkness to his ways, to the Torah, to the light of the eternal, which is Yeshua. Right? He came in the fourth day. He separated the light from the darkness. Came back to the Spirit, to the Father, to come to the obedience, to indicate, and let them be the signs, otot, to indicate seasons, moed, and days and years. So those two marks signs in the heavens to indicate seasons in the land and appointed times, otot, right? Signs. So those signs in the heavens are given on the moon. You can see there. We just talk about the crescent moon, or the renewal of the moon, and the full moon, and all these positions on the moon, the position to the sun and to the earth. So this month Chodesh shall be the beginning rush of the months to you. This month Chodesh, Exodus 12:2, just in Aviv. And this says Aviv. Why? Because in Aviv, we're just gonna see something further about Aviv. This month Chodesh, he said, Atah Chodesh should be the first months to you, to Israel. It shall be the first months of the year to you. If you go to see the people from Judaism, when they separate the Rosh Hashanah, there shall be the Rosh Hashanah this month, this Chodesh, Rosh Hashanah for you. They put it the Yom Teruah. So they miss the whole conception of seeing what is the head of the months to you. Right? That's so clear in Exodus 12:2. There's no miss point. You see something, people are celebrating the beginning of the year and Yom Teruah, following that traditions. That's not biblical faith at all. Eternals is saying here and indicated in here that the beginning of the months shall be to you. And in Exodus 12:2. Why I'm pointing to this? In Exodus 12:2, the context of them is people coming out of Egypt. Before they coming out of Egypt, I was pressing the wrong key here. They have to watch the Aviv. Some chapters before, in Exodus 9:31-32, he mentions the flax and the barley. Sorry, have a little sound interruption in there. We have to use a different mic. Okay, so we were having that the flax and the barley were destroyed because the barley was ripe. Aviv, word H24, ripe. And the flax was in bloom by the wheat, and the spelt were not destroyed because they were ripened later. Exodus 9:31-32. So we just saw on Exodus 13 that says, in the day go for the month of Aviv. So it's such a word in the Bible. Where is Aviv mentioned in the Bible? So Deuteronomy 16:1 says, observe the month of Aviv, to make the offering, the Paschal offering, the Pesach, to the eternal your Elohim. Because in the month of Aviv, eternal your Elohim brought out of Egypt. Exodus 23:15. You will keep the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you will eat unleavened bread, as I have commanded you, in the time of the month of Aviv. Because in it you left Egypt. Exodus 34:18. You will keep the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you will eat unleavened bread, as I have commanded you, in the month of Aviv, because in the month of Aviv you left Egypt. Exodus 12:1. Eternal said to Moses, as Aaron in the land of Egypt, let it be this month, new moon, Hadash, for you, beginning of the months. For may it be may it be for you the first of the month of the year. In short words, in quotes, Aviv. So, by analyzing these verses, we clearly understand that, first of all, the month of the Aviv is the first month of the year. Some basic specs, right? Second of all, that the month of Aviv, Eternal brought these people out of Egypt. No doubt of it. And the third of all, that we must keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the month of the Aviv, commemorating the Exodus from Mizraim, Exodus from Egypt, the exit from the Egypt. So with this, we have a very important reasons for the purpose of the subject, and understand that Aviv is this year that the Bible we know when it starts, according to the time of the Eternal, the time of the Almighty, as we can also celebrate their festival. So what is Aviv? The modern Hebrew definition of Aviv is green or spring. That is brought some confusion into regard this, because since the base modern definition is understood at the beginning of the year, takes place in the beginning of the spring, so therefore the vernal equinox is established as the signal to determine the beginning of the year, not as a testimony. This is just another signal to all of them, because it comes way too late. It's a vernal equinox to establish where you can have the offerings to the temple. So in this analysis, short analysis, we understand the meaning of the Hebrew word Aviv. We will try to build the biblical definition for it. So we just established in Exodus 9:31-32 that the flax and the barley were rained by the hail. One sign is still winter rains through hail, because the barley was Aviv and the flax flour Givol, but the wheat and rye were not harmed, because they were late, afilot, or dark. So that previous passage tells the story that the plagues in Egypt, and shortly before the Eternal indicates in Exodus 12:1 to Moses that this would be the beginning of the month. And this story describes how barley was destroyed by hail, because it was Aviv. Wheat and rye were not, because they still dark. So that statement gave to us to understand that Aviv is, or must understand how grain species develop. We need to understand how the grain species develop, the crops grow up. When the grains are in the early stage, their development, they are more flexible and they have a darkened color. In the other hand, it's time of the harvest approaches. They take in a lighting color, is somewhat yellowish, and become more stiff, right? In this way, the reason why the barley was destroyed and the wheat was not is because in that time the barley had already reached its stage of maturity. There was Aviv. Therefore, it was stiffer, which may cause it to be not damaged by hail. In contrast, wheat and rye still not. They're still in early stage and development, so they are more flexible. So the proof that there is to know that the stage where the development is, because Exodus 9:32. It reveals that the wheat and rye were dark, afilot. Therefore, we must reflect, and we give the purpose, the description of the destruction of the hail is just show us the characteristics that must exist between the month of Aviv, which would therefore consist in that the wheat is still in early development for Shavuot, right? That it was harvest for the feast of Shavuot, and that the barley, on the other hand, is still spiky, like yellow, ready to harvest, and it was Aviv. So Aviv and the barley harvest is the month, and the first month, in the beginning of the year, after it was ready to harvest, 2 or 3 weeks after the beginning of the first month of the year with the moon. So the barley has already reached the state of development and has a harvest brought offering to the temple and a wave offering to the temple. So yeah, and then it started counting the weeks on Bikurim for Shavuot, right? Those offerings are really important to keep on track of the festivals at the long of the year, not just for those first couple. So, and the offering of the first shave, the Bikurim, the first of the first fruits, which a measure of barley, it's carried to the first day for Sunday, in other words, in quotes for today. the first day of the week, during the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, in other words, Hag Hamatzot. It's in case described in Leviticus 23, 10 and 11, when you went, and then yeah. So for this is very clear to see that the barley was Aviv, maturity, and all of that. Therefore, barley harvest begins during Pesach, 2 or 3 weeks after the beginning of the month of Aviv. And barley is not developed enough. If barley is not developed enough to be harvested and offered in the month of Aviv during the feast, then the month of Aviv could not be beginning. It's not the beginning of the month. It would be necessary to wait another month until it's found ripe. It should also understood that not all the barley from Israel harvest was ready at the same time. So the way offering is a national offering brought to the first fields to the offer according to the instructions. So he needs to understand that the harvesting times in Israel, because the water places in the land of Israel do not receive the same kind of watering grains all the year because of the hills and water drops. The watering drains according to the land from seven different floors that is established in Israel. So the higher crops start maturing earlier than the bottom ones. Even the bottom ones has more water. It can be destroyed because of the abundance of water, for excess of water, in some words. So in summary, we can have very shortly in here that the word of Aviv is a biblical context definition, is completely tied to development of the state of barley, right? Another thing that we can have is that the first month of the year is Aviv. We just clarified that during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the first fruits of barley, the first grain of the year, which is barley harvest, were to be brought to the temple, right? So the start of the beginning of the year, it's when the state of the barley is Aviv. So if the biblical year is, I want to have this really clear. If the biblical year is not started according to the observance of the barley Aviv, the instructions related to the first fruits, counting the weeks for Shavuot, beginning of the month, therefore all the feasts could not be kept according to the biblical ordinances. Why? Because since leaving the biblical instruction and the agricultural side, for example, in the month of Started, when it's not yet Aviv, the first fruits would not be brought to the temple, to the offering for the Father. So it would be a count before, and the wheat would not be ready for necessary date on Shavuot. And when the 7th month arrives, the teeth for the fall harvest would not even taken, because it also be out of a time. So in conclusion, barley should be examined to determine the beginning of the year as well, as is determined from the eternal, which day has to be that. When barley is in the state of Aviv, according to biblical specifications, spiky, hard, light color, next to the new moon declared to say this is the first year, right? So another thing that I want to point in here, and here I wrote down in Luke 22:1, now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover. For those in the Christianity who celebrate the meal of the Lord, it has no connection at all what the Passover is. You know what? Those go together. They go together. It's one with another one. If you're going to have Passover, you by inheritance have unleavened bread. Even Paul mentioned it, and we just mentioned in the previous chapter. Let's celebrate the feast. Which feast? Not with the bread of malice, but the bread of truth, right? So, just to mention in that, another thing that I want to mention here in Mark 14:12. Now in the first day of Matzah, or Matzot, unleavened bread. So when they offered the Passover lamb, Yeshua's disciples asked him, where do you want us to celebrate the Passover? Where do you want to celebrate the Passover? He's asking, what? Nowhere do you want to institute something. It's already established by the Eternal. It's a commanded given by the Eternal. Nothing new. All right? So something that we have to see here is the seasonal changes, as I was mentioning. We have to see for the water, for the wind, for the sun, and how much they get into the crops. Now, we have this mentioned in Jeremiah 8:7. Even the stork in the sky knows the appointed times. That's called Moed, Moedim, Hebrew word 4150. And the turtle dove and the swallow and the crane keep the time of their coming. But my people do not know the ordinance of the Father. So imagine, even the animals know the time where the eternal established according to seasonal witnesses for the animals to be coming and coming back, because they see the times changing. They know their time of coming, but the eternal is pointing to people, they don't know the ordinance of the Father. And he's just talking about the Moedim in there, right? So this is the third time I'm coming to you, and the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. 2 Corinthians 13:1. That's Paul coming to his brethren, so he can say in there, and that's established to Torah, coming down from Deuteronomy 19:15. According to 2 or 3 witnesses, you shall judge. But he just mentioning here, he shall the word in mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. It cannot be more than less. It cannot be less than 2. It could be more than 3 if it's necessary. Yes, but that's why we have barley, as is established as an ordinance, a biblical ordinance. The new moon, of course, and then we can have the seasonal ones, which also brings us a lot of teachings because of the greening of the land according to a rain following for the summer coming. End of the winter, which is mostly rains in Israel and also around the world, and it just shows us a lot. As long as the earth endures, because we know Peter mentions at second washing of the earth with fire, then seed time and harvest, sowing and harvesting, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease, right? So all those things are necessary to bring us a lot of things that we need to keep growing up the crops in our lands, to keep growing all the things that we need into the land, so everything can be harvested. Keep working into what is this, right? So those are those things that we can see into the sun, the wind, are also mentioned into biblical times that we can see to the teaching to the people, where necessary they have to observe. Even Yeshua mentioned, when the time of the wind are coming, but you don't know the time of your visitation. We just mentioned that before, but see how important it was to Israel people to recognize the winds for their times and to recognize these things. Coming to this, I just want to mention that these are to observe prophetic times that proclaim holy summonses, right? These gatherings, these appointed times of the eternal, these holy convocations, those Mikrei Kodesh, are holy convocations, holy appointments that he established. Leviticus 23:1 and 2 is just appointed from the eternal, is spoken to Moses and saying, speak to the children of Israel and tell them the solemn feast of the eternal, gatherings for the people of Israel, gatherings for the holy people. Yes, biblical people, the children of the eternal, should have holy convocations, special times of coming gatherings. It's going to teach them the purpose of what they are for. Shadows of the Messiah, the one we have to follow, Yeshua, right? To stay in holiness, to stay in sanctification, to stay in perseverance, to be in obedience, to stay in uprightness of path, following the steps of the one we have to follow. You will proclaim as holy convocations, and it will be this. So all these gatherings are going to teach us all of these things: holiness, perseverance, hope, shadows of the Messiah that need to come, things that is going to come. So I'm going to see here 7 times for citations in the year. So 7 times mostly are tied to the harvest of the land, of course, the crops and everything. 7 appointment times. The first one is Pesach, the 14th of the first month. Second one is Matzah, from the 15th to the 21st of the first month, the same month. The third one is the Bikurim, the first weekday after Shabbat, Sunday. Inside of that is 7 week of Matzot. So that's something that we might have to point it to. Shavuot is 7 weeks, counting of 7 weeks plus 1 day. So 7 per 7 is 49 plus 1 day complete 50, and that goes for Bikurim. Bikurim says count 7 weeks plus 1 day, not 50 days, right? So and it's more prophetical to count in 7, because 7 is a more important number than 50, right? Yom Teruah, the first day of the 7th month. Yom Teruah, the first day of the 7th month. Never mind the new year in there. I'm sorry for that. The Yom HaKippurim, the 10th day of the 7th month as well. Look at these days, the first one, the 10th one, and the 15th to the 21st, again, 7 days on the 7th month. The 15th to the 21st of the 7th month is Sukkot. Sukkot, tabernacles, plus the 22nd, which is going to be an 8th day, what's called Shmini Atzeret, which is 8th of Convocation, Shmini Atzeret in some words. So these ones are going to show us more or less mysteries and the plan of salvation, appointed times and prophetic times in the plan of redemption, right? In the plan that the Eternal has established to the Messiah to come and fulfill. The first 4 ones, which is going to be Pesach, Matzot, Bikurim, and Shavuot, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and Pentecost, are already fulfilled in our Messiah. Where are the shadows that we're going to still see in him? Even he established those, and those that we already had those, but we're still observing this because we're holy people. We need to follow the steps that he did, and he's doing that plan of salvation to us. So we see on Pesach and Passover the death of the Lamb, the freedom from slavery, coming up from which is Egypt, the sin, seeing the material world to come to the spiritual world, and coming out of Egypt, right? That Pesach is the sacrificed lamb, which is Yeshua, and giving the blood of the covenant for the people. Matzot, Yeshua is the sinless bread, an early departure from Egypt without pulling us from the word. And Yeshua is the sinless bread. That's the bread coming from the heavens for these people, right? Bikurim, Yeshua, as the resurrections of the first fruit, the first of the first for the eternal. Shavuot, the new grain, the new wheat, the new offering to the Father, and the coming of the Ruach HaKodesh to its people. What is being promised into the prophets, fulfill in Shavuot. Then we're coming for Yom Teruah, the day to sound the shofar. Shofar is sound to gather the people together, sound of the alarm, to announce the next day of judgment and redemption, and second coming of Yeshua. Yom HaKippurim, the day of coverage for the redeemed and judgment for the disbelievers. The day that the high priest coming out of the tabernacle once in the whole year, to take away the sins for every single one. In this case, the coverage for the redeemed and the judgment for disbelievers. And Sukkot, a room for the Shekinah, or the wedding for those ones who came bringing the whole fruits to the Father, and holiness and sanctification, 7 days in a tabernacle, and temporal dwellings, as we're living every single day, temporal dwellings into which one we're offering to the Father every single word we're going, hoping for a building into the Father in the heavens, in Shamayim.